The paper gown crinkled every time I breathed, and I had been breathing too hard for 11 minutes straight. My phone sat face down on the little rolling table beside the stirrups, buzzing with a voicemail I hadn't listened to yet. I already knew what it said. My mother left the same message every time I told her about an appointment, just with the details rearranged. 33 years old, alone in a room like this. What would people think? I turned the phone the rest of the way over so I couldn't see it light up again, and I reached into my bag for the only thing that ever actually steadied my hands, a chipped porcelain teacup, blue forget-me-nots worn almost to ghosts along the rim, wrapped in a dish towel so it wouldn't rattle against my keys. My grandmother Edith had been dead 6 years, and I still could not walk into a hospital without her cup in my bag. She used to say a woman who could keep a hairline crack from becoming a break could keep anything from becoming a break if she was patient enough with the glue. My name is Wren Calloway. I was a forensic bookkeeper by trade, which meant I spent my days finding the one number in 10,000 that didn't belong, and I had decided at 33, unmarried, unmated, done waiting for a version of my life that required someone else's permission to start, that I was going to have a baby on my own terms, from an anonymous donor bank 3 towns over, chosen from a spreadsheet the way I chose everything. Carefully. Twice checked, no romance required. The technician came in without introducing herself first, which struck me even then as strange. She had thin hands and a laminated badge that read M. Huxton, and she would not quite look at the vial she was carrying, the way you don't look directly at something you're ashamed of. Single embryo transfer, Dr. Feld said, more to the chart than to me. Donor sample 4471. Confirmed twice. He glanced at Huxton. She nodded too fast. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? I was 33 years old and about to become a mother by my own decision, no one else's, and the last thing on my mind was a technician's hands shaking around a vial she kept angling away from the light. Ready? Dr. Feld asked. I've been ready for 4 years, I said, and that was true. And it was the last true thing I would say before my entire life quietly rearranged itself 2 floors below me, in a locked freezer I would not see the inside of for another 6 weeks. The procedure took under 10 minutes. I lay there afterward with my knees still slightly bent, staring at a water stain on the ceiling shaped like a comma. And I let myself hope in the reckless, undisciplined way I never allowed myself anywhere else in my life. I thought about names. I thought about the fig tree I wanted to plant in a yard I didn't have yet. I thought about my grandmother's cup, safe in my bag, and how I would tell my child about her one day, about the tea she made from chamomile and a single curl of orange peel, about how she used to say, some of the best things in a life arrive already broken and get loved back into shape anyway. In 9 days, I would know if it had worked. I did not know that it already hadn't, not the way I thought. Somewhere below me, a freezer door had been left unlocked for 4 minutes longer than protocol allowed, and a vial with my name on the label was no longer holding what it was supposed to hold. The 2 lines on the test, 9 days later, made me cry in a gas station bathroom at 6 a.m. before my shift. The good kind of crying. The kind that comes out of you sideways because you've been holding your whole body braced for disappointment for so long, you forgot what it felt like to be let down gently instead. I called Nadia first. Nadia Ose had sat in the cubicle next to mine at Ashwell and Price Accounting for 4 years, and she was the only person in my life who had never once asked me why I was doing this alone, only whether I needed a ride. You're going to be insufferable about this, she said, and I could hear her smiling. I'm already insufferable. Fair. That same week, I stood up in a client meeting and lost, for approximately 90 seconds, every ounce of the caution that had gotten me through 11 years in accounting without incident. Gregory Price, senior partner, my boss, had asked me to smooth a set of numbers for a new client, a shipping and logistics holding company called Feldstone Maritime, before the quarterly filing. Smooth was the word he used. I had read enough forensic case studies to know smooth was never actually smooth. "These entries don't reconcile," I said in front of the client's representative, a composed woman in a charcoal coat who had said almost nothing since she'd sat down, watching everything with the stillness of someone counting exits out of habit. Not by a rounding error, by $400,000 moved through 3 shell accounts in 11 days. Ren, Price's voice had the flat warning tone he used when he wanted a room to forget what had just been said. "I won't sign it," I said. "I don't care whose name is on the retainer." Nobody in that conference room said anything for 11 full seconds. 11. Because I counted them the way I count everything when I'm frightened and trying not to show it. Then the woman in the charcoal coat closed her folder, unhurried, and looked at me. Really looked. The kind of look that catalogs a person instead of dismissing them, and said only, noted, before she left. I did not know her name. I did not know that she had come to that meeting for one reason that had nothing to do with shipping manifests, and that reason was currently 4 cells and growing, tucked inside a body that had no idea what it was carrying. I found out at my 7-week ultrasound on a Tuesday, in a room with the lights turned low and a screen turned toward me so I could watch. The technician went quiet in a way I didn't like. She called Dr. Feld in. He went quiet too, and then he said the words that split my life cleanly into before and after. "There are 4 heartbeats, Miss Calloway. That's not possible," I said. My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. "I had a single embryo transfer. You said so yourself. I have it in writing. I know what I said." He would not meet my eyes either, and I understood, with the particular cold clarity of someone whose job is finding what doesn't add up, that I was looking at 2 people who already knew something I didn't. That night, a black car was parked outside my building. Engine off, headlights off. A woman leaning against the passenger door with her arms crossed, like she'd been carved there. She had a scar through one eyebrow and the patient stillness of someone who has waited outside worse buildings than mine. "Miss Calloway," she said. "My name is Sabel Reyes. Miss Voss would like a word." "I don't know a Miss Voss. You will," Sabel said, and opened the car door, and somewhere underneath the fear that should have stopped me from getting in, some part of me, the part that had spent a career following numbers that didn't reconcile until they told her the truth, already knew I was about to. The house sat at the top of Alder Hill behind a gate that opened without anyone touching it, lit at the edges by lights so subtle they looked like moonlight had simply decided to behave. I had grown up in a 2-bedroom rental with water stains shaped like continents on the ceiling, and I walked into a front hall with floors so polished I could see the chandelier upside down in them, and I understood, in my body, before my mind caught up, that I had crossed into a world with different laws of gravity. A man was waiting in the hall who hadn't been asked for. He had Imogen's coloring and none of her stillness, restless hands. A smile that arrived a half-second before anything funny had been said. "Well," he said, looking me over the way you'd look over a used car with a mileage discrepancy. "So this is the accountant." "Desmond," Sable's voice went flat. "Just saying hello to family," he said. And something in the way he said family made the back of my neck go cold, though I couldn't have told you why yet. Then a door opened at the end of the hall, and the woman in the charcoal coat walked out, except she wasn't wearing charcoal now, she was wearing black, and she moved like every room she entered had been built to her exact measurements. Her scent reached me before she did, black pepper and rain-struck slate, sharp and cold, and somehow, underneath it, achingly lonely, the way an empty house still smells like the people who used to live in it. "Miss Calloway," she said. "I imagine you have questions." "I have about 400 of them," I said, starting with why the woman from my client meeting is standing in a mansion telling me she's expecting me. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed her mouth and was gone before it finished. "My name is Imogen Voss," she said, "and I owe you an explanation that is going to sound insane before it starts sounding true." Mrs. Okafor, who ran the house with the unhurried authority of a woman who had buried 3 of Imogen's predecessors' enemies in casseroles, put a plate of food in front of me before anyone said another word. Roast chicken, the kind with rosemary pressed under the skin, and a pot of tea that smelled, impossibly, like chamomile and orange peel, though I hadn't told a single soul in that house what my grandmother used to make. "How?" I started, and my voice cracked on the single syllable. "You mentioned it," Sabel said, from the doorway, arms still crossed. "In the car. You didn't notice you were talking." I hadn't. I filed that away, that someone in this house was listening even when I thought I was only breathing. Imogen sat across from me, hands folded, and told me, in the plain declarative sentences of a woman who had learned early that softening bad news only made it slower to land. 9 years ago, after her mother was murdered by a rival family and she inherited an empire she was 19 years too young to run, she had banked genetic material under a false name at a fertility clinic 3 towns from her own territory, told no one, not even Sable, because she had learned exactly one lesson from watching her mother die, that anything you loved could be used against you. And the only way to keep a future heir safe was to make sure nobody, not counsel, not cousin, not enemy, ever knew that future existed until she chose to make it real. "Someone found it anyway," she said. "6 weeks ago, my private sample was removed from cold storage. 4 days later, in an unrelated clinic across town, a woman having a single embryo transfer received 4. I set my grandmother's teacup down very carefully because my hands had started to shake and I did not trust myself with anything breakable. "You're telling me I'm pregnant with your children." "I'm telling you," Imogen said, and for the first time her flat voice caught, just slightly, on a word, that whoever did this to my genetic line did it to your body without asking either of us, and that from this moment forward, you will not carry that alone. Whatever this costs. I give you my word. I laughed, which surprised both of us, a short, disbelieving, slightly hysterical sound. "You don't even know me. I know you stood in a room full of men who signed my cousin's checks and told them you wouldn't lie for $400,000, Imogen said. "I know enough. I didn't sleep that first night at Alder Hill. I lay in a guest room the size of my entire apartment, one hand flat against my stomach, and thought about the word mistake, which was the word Dr. Feld had used on the phone that afternoon, apologetic and clinical, a clerical error, he'd called it, a terrible, unprecedented clerical error, and I thought about how strange it was that a mistake could already, 4 heartbeats in, feel more like a beginning than an ending. I learned the shape of the house before I learned the shape of the danger inside it. Alder Hill had 11 bedrooms, 4 staircases, and a security detail that rotated in shifts so quiet I only noticed them by the way certain hallways went suddenly still when I walked through. Mrs. Okafor fed me like feeding was a form of argument she intended to win, and within a week I understood that every meal that arrived at exactly the right temperature, in exactly the portion I could stomach through the nausea, was Imogen's doing, relayed through a kitchen staff she never personally entered. She had someone research first trimester nutrition for multiples, Sable told me. On the 3rd day, watching me pick at a plate of dry crackers and ginger tea that had appeared without my asking. 4 separate specialists. She read all of it herself first. Why would she do that? Sable looked at me the way you look at someone who has genuinely never seen weather before. Because they're hers, she said. And because, unless I am very much mistaken, so are you starting to be. I didn't believe that yet. I believed the wealth gap tour instead, the guest wing that cost more than my mother's house, the security gate that required a retinal scan, the way Desmond's eyes followed me down every hallway like an appraisal he hadn't finished. He found me alone on the 4th day, in the library, and leaned against the doorframe with the ease of a man who had never once been told no in that house. "Careful what you're carrying, little accountant," he said, pleasant as a knife wrapped in silk. "Some inheritances aren't survivable." Is that a threat? It's a fact of the industry. He smiled, without any warmth reaching it. Ask my aunt what happened to the last person who complicated the family line. I didn't ask Imogen that night. I asked her 3 nights later, after the 3rd break-in attempt at the estate's outer fence had put the entire house on lockdown, after Sable had walked me, at 2:47 in the morning, past 6 armed guards into a reinforced room behind the library that I hadn't known existed. My grandmother's teacup went with me everywhere by then, wrapped in the same dish towel, and it was in my hand when the window in the hallway outside the safe room shattered, not from a bullet, Sable said later, but from the concussive force of something detonating near the perimeter gate, and I dropped the towel and the cup hit the marble floor and cracked clean through the handle. The same hairline my grandmother used to run her thumb over now split all the way to the base. Imogen found me on the floor of the safe room 20 minutes later, on my knees, gathering the pieces of a teacup like it was the only thing in the house still worth saving. She knelt across from me without a word and started picking up the smallest shards, the ones I couldn't see through the tears I was too proud to explain. "It was my grandmother's," I said, finally, when the silence got too big to hold. "She used to say broken things get loved back into shape." I don't know why I'm telling you that. I don't know why it matters. "It matters," Imogen said, "because you are sitting on a marble floor at 3 in the morning, 6 months pregnant with 4 children that used to belong only to me, crying over a teacup instead of the gunfire, and I would very much like to know how a person survives being that brave and that soft at the same time. I'm not brave." "You told a room full of my cousin's money men you wouldn't lie for them," she said. "You are the bravest person who has ever sat in this house, and I include myself in that count." Her scent had changed, the cold slate note gone warm at the edges, something almost sweet bleeding through it, the way a room floods when the person in it stops guarding themselves. I could smell my own scent answering it, brown sugar and warm cotton, rising unbidden in the small space between us. "Tell me to stop," Imogen said quietly, not moving closer, "and I will. I need you to know that before anything else happens between us." "Don't stop," I said. And she closed the last 6 inches between us slowly, like she was giving me 100 more chances to change my mind, and kissed me like I was something she had been forbidden to want for so long she'd forgotten it was allowed. Sable's radio crackled in the hallway before either of us could say anything after. "Perimeter secure," she reported through the door, deliberately not looking at either of us when we emerged. Whoever it was got away clean. Professional. This wasn't kids with a grudge. Imogen's jaw tightened in the way I was learning meant she was doing arithmetic with lives instead of numbers. "Find out who," she said, and something in her voice had gone back to slate. The weeks after the break-in were the strangest peace I had ever known, danger held at arm's length by armed men at every gate, and inside that ring of steel, a domestic life neither of us had ever been handed before. Imogen decided, unilaterally, and with the same force she applied to everything, that the nursery would be finished before I was too far along to enjoy watching it happen, and I discovered, with more delight than I expected, that a woman who ran an empire with a glance could be entirely defeated by an Allen wrench. "This crib is defective," she announced on her knees on the nursery floor, holding a hex key like it had personally wronged her. "The crib is fine," I said, laughing so hard my ribs hurt, which at 22 weeks with 4 babies happened easily. "You put the side rail on backward. I built a shipping conglomerate. Congratulations, the crib still won." She threw the hex key down with the wounded dignity of a woman who had never lost to furniture before, and Mrs. Okafor, passing the doorway with a stack of towels, didn't even slow down. "Third one this week," she said placidly. I told her to hire someone. "I am capable of assembling a crib," Imogen said, "to no one. To the crib, to the universe. You are capable of many things," I said. This is apparently not one of them. She looked at me across the mess of half-built furniture, and something in her face went soft and unguarded in a way I hadn't seen since the safe room, and she said, "I never planned on any of this. Not children. Not this. I banked that sample 9 years ago as a contingency I hoped I'd never need, because I decided the day they buried my mother that love was a door someone could walk through to hurt you, and the only safe thing was to never open it." She picked the hex key back up, turned it over in her hands instead of using it. "I don't know how to tell you that I'm glad the contingency failed. That feels like a betrayal of everything I built myself to survive on. And I'm telling you anyway." I sat down on the floor across from her, careful of my own new center of gravity, and told her about my father, who left before I was old enough to remember his face, and my mother, who had spent 33 years mistaking coldness for protection the way Imogen's mother apparently had, and how I had built my entire adult life around never needing anyone to choose me because I had decided, quietly, at some point I couldn't name, that I would rather choose myself first and be right about it than wait and be disappointed. "I stopped waiting for someone to choose me," I told her. "I chose myself instead." It took me a long time to be at peace with that. And now there's room for both, I think, I said. "I just wasn't expecting the second part to come with a security detail and a crib I can't build either." We planted a fig tree together the following week in the side garden where the afternoon light lasted longest, because I'd mentioned once, offhand in the first week at Alder Hill, that I'd always wanted one and never had a yard to put it in. And I hadn't realized Imogen was the kind of woman who remembered offhand things until Mrs. Okafor showed up with a sapling and a look that said this had been planned for days. The warmth didn't last. Warmth in that house never lasted longer than it took Desmond to notice it. Nadia called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was folding tiny onesies in the nursery, her voice pitched too high, too fast. "Ren, you need to see this. Someone leaked to 3 different outlets. They're saying the Voss line has an illegitimate claim problem. They're using your name." The article, when I found it, called me an outside accountant of no known standing, described the pregnancy as a manufactured crisis engineered to destabilize the Voss succession, and included details about my apartment, my mother, my job, details no reporter should have had without someone on the inside handing them over. The family council convened an emergency session 2 days later. I wasn't invited, which Imogen told me, jaw tight, was itself a message, a reminder from 11 old men and women that in their eyes I was cargo, not kin. Desmond stood in front of that council, I learned afterward, and argued that a head of family who could not control her own bloodline, whose heir had arrived through sabotage and scandal instead of sanctioned union, could not be trusted to control anything else. He did not call for a vote that day. He didn't need to. He only needed the room to start wondering. I went to my old apartment that Friday to collect the last of my things, over Sable's objection. Because I refused to let fear finish the job of erasing every corner of my old life, and because I needed, badly, to feel like a person who still had agency in a world that had started making decisions about my body without me in the room. I never made it back to the car. I remember a hand over my mouth, the smell of gasoline and cheap cologne, my grandmother's teacup, repaired with careful glue 2 weeks earlier, sitting on my old kitchen counter where I'd gone to retrieve it, swept off the counter in the struggle and shattering a second time against the tile, this time past any mending. I remember counting my own pulse to stay conscious, the way I count everything when I am afraid. 1, 2, 3. Past 40 before the world went dark at the edges. I woke up zip-tied to a chair in a room that smelled like motor oil, my phone gone, my hands numb, and 4 small heartbeats fluttering under my ribs that I had no way to check on and every reason in the world to be terrified for. Desmond walked in 20 minutes later, and for the first time since I'd met him, he wasn't smiling. "You should have stayed an accountant," he said. "You should have stayed invisible. That was the deal the world offered you, and you didn't have to say no." "I never said yes to anything you offered," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt, because some stubborn, forensic part of my brain had already started doing the only thing it knew how to do under pressure: cataloging, counting, building a case. Feldstone Maritime, $400,000 moved through 3 shell accounts. A lab technician who wouldn't meet my eyes. I had started pulling threads the week after the embezzlement meeting, quietly, on my own time, because a discrepancy that size doesn't stop mattering just because your life gets complicated. I had a folder. Nadia had a copy of that folder hidden in her apartment exactly for a day like this one because I had told her 3 weeks ago, half joking and fully serious, "If anything happens to me, this is why." "You've been buying silence for years," I said. Marla Huxton, a security contractor who doesn't show up on any legitimate payroll. Feldstone Maritime, which doesn't ship anything as far as I can tell, except money you don't want traced back to you. "I found it before you took me. Did you think I'd stop being an accountant just because you put me in a chair?" Something flickered behind his eyes, not fear yet, but the first cousin of it, recalculation. He crossed the room and crouched in front of me, close enough that I could smell the cologne again, sour and cheap. "Then it's a good thing," he said quietly, "that folders can be burned." "Not the one that's already been read by 3 different journalists," I said, which was a lie, a pure and total bluff built out of 11 years of learning exactly which numbers to say out loud to make a guilty man's hands shake, and I watched it land, watched him hesitate half a second too long, and in that half second, the door behind him came off its hinges. Imogen came through it like weather. I had never seen her the way Sable must have seen her 100 times, the version of her that had built and defended an empire with her own hands, and I understood, in the 2 seconds it took her to cross the room, exactly why an entire city called her the Marble Queen of Harrow Row. Desmond turned, gun rising, and Imogen put herself between the barrel and the chair I was zip-tied to without so much as a flinch, and the shot that was meant for me tore through her shoulder instead. She didn't go down. She hit him once, hard enough that he did, and Sable was on him a second later with a knee in his back and a weapon at the base of his skull, and for one long, terrible moment I watched Imogen's finger tighten on the trigger of her own gun, aimed at her cousin's head, her whole body shaking with something that wasn't fear. "Don't," I said. My voice cracked on the word, but it held. "Not like this. Let the council see exactly what he is. Let them watch him lose everything in the light instead of the dark. That's worse for him than this. I promise you it is." Her hand shook another second. Then it lowered. "Cut her loose," Imogen said to Sable, meaning me, her voice gone rough with pain and something raw underneath it, and she sank down onto her knees in front of my chair the moment my hands were free, checking my pulse at my wrist with fingers that trembled, checking the small movements under my ribs that told her, before I could, that all 4 heartbeats were still going. "You will not carry this alone," she said again, quieter this time, like a vow, instead of a promise. "I told you that. I meant it. I am so sorry it took me this long to reach you." "You came," I said. "That's not late. That's exactly on time." The council convened again 6 days later, this time with me in the room, standing at a long table in front of 11 people who had spent a decade being afraid of the woman sitting beside me and had never once had to look at the woman they'd almost let a smear campaign erase. I laid out the ledger myself, Feldstone Maritime's shell accounts, the wire transfers to an account under Marla Huxton's maiden name, a security contractor's invoices that traced, line by line, back to Desmond's personal signature. And I did it the way I did everything. Carefully, twice checked, no romance required, until even the council members who had wanted to believe him had nowhere left to. Look but the truth. $400,000, I said, closing the folder, moved to buy the silence of a lab technician who swapped a vial, and to buy men who broke into this house twice and abducted a pregnant woman off a public street. I found every dollar. I will testify to every dollar, in whatever room you need me to. Desmond didn't argue. There was nothing left to argue with. The council voted him stripped of rank and name within the hour, and Sable escorted him out through the same front hall where he'd once looked me over like a mileage discrepancy, and this time nobody in that house watched him leave with anything but relief. Imogen found me afterward on the terrace, her arms still in a sling, the fig tree we'd planted throwing new leaves in the last of the light. "Ask me with your words," I said, before she could speak, because I already knew what was coming, and I wanted to hear her say it out loud in a house that finally belonged to both of us. "Wren Calloway," she said, low and steady, "will you let me claim you?" All the way. Not because a vial got swapped and a court of accidents put us in the same room, because I know exactly who you are now, and I choose you on purpose. "Tell me to stop," I said, "and I will," giving the words back to her the way she'd first given them to me, and she laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, the first one I'd heard in that house that wasn't guarded at the edges. "Don't stop," she said, and closed the distance. And when her mouth found the curve of my throat and her teeth followed, gentle and certain, the bond snapped into place between us like a held breath finally released. Her scent and mine tangled together into something that belonged to neither of us alone anymore. The proposal came properly 3 weeks later, on one knee in the garden beside the fig tree. A small worn box that had belonged to her mother, and I said yes before she finished the sentence. The bonding ceremony was small. Sable stood up for Imogen with her jaw locked against visible emotion the entire time, and Nadia stood up for me in a dress she complained about for a week beforehand and cried through anyway, and my mother came, quieter than I'd ever seen her, and cried too. For reasons I think surprised even her. The vows were short. "I choose you," Imogen said, "not because fate mixed up a vial, because I know you now." And I answered, "I already chose myself. Turns out there was room for you too." Marla Huxton lost her license within the month and pled guilty rather than face trial alongside Desmond. Dr. Feld's clinic closed under state investigation before the year was out. Gregory Price was quietly disbarred from the accounting board once the Feldstone Maritime books surfaced in full, his complicity laid out in the same careful ledger that had ended Desmond's reach. Desmond himself stood trial that autumn on charges that had nothing to do with family bylaws and everything to do with kidnapping and attempted murder, and the empire he'd wanted so badly went on entirely without him. 6 months after that, in a room 2 floors below the nursery we'd finally finished together, I delivered 4 children into a world that had tried, in a dozen small and large ways, to convince me I didn't deserve this much loudness in my life. Callan came first, furious and red-faced. Rosalind second, silent and watchful, already cataloging the room the way her mother did. Juniper third, already reaching for anything within grasp. Theodore last, and smallest, and somehow the loudest of all 4 once he found his voice. Sable held Theodore first, out of everyone, stiff-armed and terrified and visibly undone by it, and said, to no one and everyone, in 11 years I have never once seen her wait up for anyone. She waits at that nursery window every night now. Has since the day we brought you home. It was the closest thing to a blessing Sable Reyes had ever given anyone, and I understood exactly what it was worth. A year on, the fig tree bore its first real fruit, and Mrs. Okafor made a pie out of it that nobody could stop eating. My grandmother's teacup sat on the nursery windowsill, mended a second time, the crack traced now in a thin seam of gold instead of hidden glue, because I had decided, somewhere in that long and impossible year, that a thing didn't have to hide where it broke to be worth keeping. In the mornings, the light came through that window first, across 4 small beds and 1 repaired cup, and a garden full of fruit that shouldn't have grown as fast as it had, and Imogen would stand there some mornings, just watching. Like she still couldn't quite believe any of it was allowed to be hers. I used to think being overlooked was a kind of safety, that if no one saw you clearly enough to want anything from you, no one could take anything away either. I know now that the opposite was true the whole time. The mistake that was supposed to ruin my life turned out to be the truest thing that ever happened to it. And the love I got instead of the plan I'd made for myself was not a smaller thing settled for. It was the larger thing I hadn't known how to ask for. The end.